The trunk slammed shut beneath her hands, and Abigail Whittaker Hale did not flinch when the front door of Hale House crashed open downstairs. She heard his boots on the stairs. She heard him calling her name like a man calling a dog. And still she fastened the leather strap slow and steady, like a woman who had already buried her marriage in her own heart. Friends, before this story unfolds, do hit that subscribe button and stay with me till the very end. And tell me down in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? I want to see how far this story has traveled. The summer storm had been threatening Virginia all afternoon, and now it broke wide open across the tobacco fields, just as Nathaniel Hale's carriage pulled into the gravel drive of Hale House. He stepped down without waiting for the footman. His boots hit the mud with a clean, sharp sound, and the rain ran off the brim of his hat in a thin gray curtain. He carried a leather portfolio under his arm, pressed tight against his ribs, and inside that portfolio sat the papers that would end his marriage. He had practiced what he would say to her. He had practiced it on the long ride from Charleston, while Clara Bellamy's perfume still clung to his coat collar. He would be firm. He would be reasonable. He would offer her the small farm in the Shenandoah Valley, the one his uncle had left behind, and he would tell her that a quiet country life would suit a woman of her temperament. He would say it kindly. He would not raise his voice. And when she wept, and she would weep, because women always wept in moments such as these, he would press a clean handkerchief into her hand and remind her that she was still in name. Mrs. Hale. That was the plan. Nathaniel had no notion as he climbed the front steps and shook the rain from his hat that his wife had ridden ahead of him by 3 full days. "Mr. Hale, sir." The young stable boy caught up to him at the door, breathless. "Sir, I was told to—" "Not now, boy." "But, sir, the missus—" "I said not now." He brushed the boy aside and pushed the great oak door open with his shoulder. The hall was dim. The candles in the wall sconces had not been lit yet, though the storm had darkened the house an hour early. "Mrs. Freeman," he called out. "Where is the lady of the house?" His voice carried up the staircase and died there. Mrs. Ruth Freeman appeared from the back hallway, drying her hands on a clean linen cloth. Her face, dark and carved and steady, gave nothing away. She did not curtsy. She had stopped curtsying to Nathaniel Hale 4 years ago, and he had been too proud to notice. "She's in her chamber, Mr. Hale. Tell her I wish to see her in the parlor." "I won't, sir." Nathaniel stopped with his hat halfway off his head. "I beg your pardon. I said I won't, sir." Ruth folded the cloth over her arm. "If you wish to speak to Miss Abigail, you'll go up them stairs and speak to her where she stands. I'm not your messenger tonight." "Miss Abigail." He repeated the words slowly. "She is Mrs. Hale Ruth." "That'll be for her to decide, sir." She turned and walked back into the kitchen, and Nathaniel stood alone in his own front hall with rainwater dripping off his coat and a cold thing turning over in his stomach. He climbed the stairs. The door to her chamber was open. Abigail stood with her back to him, bent over a small wooden trunk at the foot of the bed. She was dressed plainly. A traveling gown of dark gray cotton, a white collar, no jewels, no lace. Her hair was pinned up in the simple knot she had worn the day he married her, the same knot she had worn every day since, though he had not noticed that either. He had expected her in silk. He had expected her in something soft and ladylike, that would make the work of casting her off feel less like cruelty and more like a kindness done to a fragile creature. Instead, he found a woman who looked like she was leaving for market. Abigail. She did not turn. "Abigail, I have come a long way, and I would like the courtesy of—" "The carriage will be ready within the hour, Nathaniel." He froze in the doorway. "Whose carriage?" "Mine. You have no carriage." "I have one tonight." She knelt and pressed the lid of the trunk down and ran her hand along the leather strap to fasten it. The buckle clicked shut. Only then did she stand up and turn to face him. He had not looked at his wife, truly looked at her, in perhaps 2 years. He saw now that she was thinner than he remembered. Her eyes were steady. There was no redness at the rims. There was no swelling beneath them. She had not been crying. She did not look like she intended to begin. "I have something to say to you," he said. His voice came out lower than he wished. "I have brought papers from Richmond." "I know what you have brought." You cannot possibly know. Cousin Whitfield's clerk wrote to me from the courthouse on Tuesday. He posted the letter the same hour you signed the documents. I received it Wednesday morning before breakfast." She tilted her head just slightly. "You really ought to pay your clerks better, Nathaniel. The good ones know who fed them when their wages were late." His jaw worked. The rain hammered against the chamber window. That correspondence was confidential. So was our marriage. He drew the portfolio out from beneath his arm and held it up between them like a shield. "I came here to discuss this with you reasonably. I will not be drawn into theatrics." "There are no theatrics, Nathaniel. There is only a trunk and a carriage and a road north." "North. North." "You will not go north." "I will." "Abigail." He took a step into the room. "Abigail, you are my wife. I was your wife 5 years ago in a chapel before God and a half-dozen relatives who could not wait to eat the wedding supper. I have been your housekeeper, your accountant, and your debt-payer since." She paused. "I have not been your wife in any meaningful sense of the word for some time. I think you know that." "Don't speak to me like that." "How would you have me speak to you?" "Softly." "In the voice I used the first year when I waited up by the window for your carriage, and the carriage did not come, or in the voice of the second year, when I stopped waiting at the window and waited at the table instead, and the supper grew cold between us 3 times a week, or perhaps the voice of the third year when I stopped waiting altogether." "Enough. You have not heard the half of it." "I said enough." His voice cracked through the room, and she did not so much as blink. That was the moment something in Nathaniel Hale began to give way at the foundation. He had imagined this scene 100 times on the ride home, and in every imagining she had wept or pleaded or screamed or thrown a vase. In every imagining he had remained the steady one, the reasonable one, the one with the upper hand. Instead, his wife had folded her hands in front of her plain gray gown and was looking at him the way a schoolmistress looks at a slow-witted boy. He set the portfolio down on her writing desk. "There is a farm," he said, and his voice was different now, tighter. "In the Shenandoah Valley. My uncle Tobias left it to me. It is small, but the land is good. The tenant has agreed to vacate by Michaelmas. I have arranged a stipend of $300 per annum paid quarterly through the Bank of Virginia and the use of a maidservant. Nathaniel. And you may keep your mother's silver, of course, and the small portrait of your grandmother that hangs in the morning room and any books from the library you particularly favor, and Nathaniel. And there is no need for any unpleasantness. I have spoken to no one. The matter can be handled with discretion." "Nathaniel, stop." He stopped. "Why?" she asked him. "Are you describing this farm to me as though I am going to it? The rain in the window, the clock on the mantel, the single tallow candle Ruth had lit and left on the dresser." Nathaniel Hale stood in the middle of the rug his wife had bought with her father's money, and felt the silence press against him from every wall. "Because," he said carefully, "that is the arrangement. That is your arrangement. It is more than generous, Abigail. Most men in your position would send their wives to a Shenandoah farm so they could court a Charleston widow without scandal." "Yes. I expect they would. I expect they do. I expect the practice is so common that you confused it with kindness somewhere along the way." "That is not, Clara, has nothing to do with—" "Don't." That single word came out of her so quiet and so cold that Nathaniel felt it land somewhere behind his sternum. "Don't lie to me tonight, Nathaniel. You may lie to me any other night of your life if you wish. You may lie to your friends, your colleagues, your governor, your God. But not tonight. Not in this room. Not while my trunk is buckled and the horses are being put to." He opened his mouth. He closed it. She walked past him to the writing desk and picked up the portfolio he had set down. She opened it without ceremony. She read the top page. She read the second page. She turned to the third. Her face did not change. She might have been reading a tradesman's bill. When she had finished, she set the portfolio back down perfectly square against the corner of the desk. You have been thorough. I tried to be fair. Fair. She let the word sit in the air. Nathaniel, do you know what is in the strongbox under the floorboard of the steward's office? What? The strongbox. Under the floorboard. In the steward's office. There is no strongbox under any floorboard in this house. There is. I had Mr. Pettigrew put it in the year your tobacco crop failed. The year you went to Washington City and did not come back for 9 months. She moved to the bedside table and opened a small drawer. She drew out a brass key on a faded blue ribbon and held it up between them. This opens it. Abigail, what are you? In that strong box are the receipts for every debt of yours I have paid in the last 4 years. The note to Colonel Randolph for the Bay gelding. The settlement with the Cooper in Lynchburg. The tuition for your nephew at William and Mary, which your sister begged you to cover and which you forgot for 2 terms running. The bond against the South Fields when the bank threatened foreclosure in the spring of 14. The bribe, yes, Nathaniel. The bribe that you paid to keep the surveyor's report quiet on the boundary dispute, which you did not in fact pay because you had no money that month, and I paid it under your name through Mr. Pettigrew, and you never asked where the funds came from. He had gone very still. You are lying. I am not. You could not possibly have. My father was a merchant, Nathaniel. Did you ever wonder why he gave you $15,000 on our wedding day, and not $1 more? He did not trust you. He was a careful man. He left the rest in trust for me, payable in installments administered by my uncle in Philadelphia. You signed the marriage settlement without reading it. I watched you do it. I have wondered every year since whether to be insulted or relieved. That money belongs to me, Nathaniel. Under the terms of the settlement which your own attorney drafted, and which you signed in the parlor of my father's house in Philadelphia on the 2nd of June, 1811. I am not the wife you took. I am the wife you did not bother to learn. He sank down onto the edge of the bed because his knees were shaking, and he did not trust them. Why? He said, and his voice was almost a whisper now. Why would you pay my debts? Because the people working these fields had children. Because Mrs. Freeman had been promised a wage, and you were 3/4 behind. Because the smithy in town had a sick wife and could not wait on your account. Because if Hale House fell, the 83 souls inside, it fell with it. She paused. And because, Nathaniel, for a long time I believed you would come home one evening and notice. Notice what? That I was here. The word here hung between them like a struck bell. He could not look at her. He looked instead at the brass key on the blue ribbon still pinched between her thumb and finger. I did not know, he said. No, you did not. Abigail. You will not come closer to me, Nathaniel. He had not moved. But he had thought about moving, and somehow she had known. I am not finished speaking, she said. And once I am finished I will go, and I will ask you as a kindness not to follow. He nodded. He did not know why he nodded, but he did. You came here tonight, she said, to send me to a small farm with a small stipend and a small life so that you might court Mrs. Bellamy with a clean conscience. I will not be sent. I am leaving instead. Do you understand the difference? Yes. I will not be going to the Shenandoah farm. I will not be drawing your stipend. I will not be using your name. I will be taking the carriage that I paid for with the horses that I purchased from Colonel Marsh in March under the name Whitaker, and I will be going to Philadelphia, where my uncle has held my father's trust these 11 years, and from there I will go where I please. You, Abigail, you cannot travel alone the roads. Mrs. Freeman will accompany me. Mrs. Freeman is a free woman, Nathaniel. My father freed her in 1809, the year before he gave her to me as my companion. She has chosen to come. She has not chosen to stay. He put his face in his hands. And the house, he said muffled. The household, the accounts, Mr. Pettigrew has every ledger in order. He will explain whatever you require. He has been paid through Christmas. After Christmas, you will pay him yourself, or you will not, and that will be your concern." She set the brass key down on the writing desk beside the portfolio gently, as though she were laying down a thing she had loved once. "I am leaving you the strongbox." He looked up. "What?" "Every receipt in it, every signature, every record of every debt I paid in your name." She drew on her gloves, slowly, finger by finger. "I could take them with me. I could write a single letter to the Richmond papers, and you would not be received at any drawing room between here and the Potomac for the remainder of your natural life. Your political ambitions would be finished by Tuesday week. Abigail, I am leaving them for you." "Why?" "Because I do not wish to be the kind of woman who burns a man's house down on her way out the door. And because Nathaniel somewhere underneath the politician, and the heir, and the husband who could not be bothered, there is a boy who lost his mother at 8, and his father at 15, and was raised by uncles who told him a Hale never weeps. I remember that boy. I married him. He is not the man standing in front of me tonight, but I remember him." She buttoned the last glove. "Goodbye, Nathaniel." "Abigail, wait, just wait." She walked past him. He caught her sleeve at the door, not roughly, just the cuff of it between two fingers. "Don't go like this," he said. "Please, don't go in silence. Yell at me, strike me, throw something. I would bear it. I swear to God I would bear it. Just don't walk out of this house without what, Nathaniel? Without giving me the chance to what? To explain, to apologize, to make a speech." His hand fell away from her sleeve. "You had 5 years of chances," she said quietly. "Tonight is mine." She stepped through the doorway. He stood there in her empty chamber and listened to her footsteps go down the staircase. He listened to Mrs. Freeman's lower voice in the front hall. He listened to the front door open, and the rain come in for one long moment, and the front door shut. He listened to the carriage wheels on the gravel. He did not move from the spot until the sound of those wheels was completely gone, and even then he only moved as far as the writing desk, where he sat down in his wife's chair and put his hand on the brass key on the blue ribbon, and discovered in the silence of his own house that his hand was shaking so badly he could not pick it up. Outside, the storm went on. Inside, somewhere downstairs, Mrs. Freeman's kettle was beginning to whistle on a stove she had not turned off because she had known even before the master came home that the master was going to need a long sit-down with a cup of strong tea and the wreckage of his own pride. Nathaniel Hale, 29 years old, master of 400 acres, heir to a name his great-grandfather had carried off a ship from Bristol, sat in his wife's chair with his face in his hands, and listened to the kettle scream from 2 floors away. He did not know yet that the woman who had just left him would within 18 months be one of the most quietly powerful women in the city of Boston. He only knew in that moment that the house he had been so eager to come home to had gone out the front door with a leather trunk and a brass key, and a woman in a plain gray gown who had not in the end given him the satisfaction of a single tear. And that was the night Hale House learned the difference between a wife and a witness, and Nathaniel Hale began the long, slow lesson of which one he had thrown away. The kettle was still screaming on the stove when Mrs. Freeman heard the carriage wheels reach the bend at the bottom of the drive, and she walked back into the kitchen and lifted it off the heat with hands that did not shake, though they had every right to. Upstairs, Nathaniel Hale finally picked up the brass key on the blue ribbon. He turned it over once, twice in fingers that would not stop trembling, and then he closed his fist around it so tight the metal bit into his palm. He welcomed the bite. He needed something to feel besides the hollow opening up in the middle of his chest. He did not move from the writing desk for the better part of an hour. When at last he stood, his legs nearly went out from under him. He caught the edge of the desk. He breathed in once hard. He walked to the door of her chamber and stopped on the threshold because crossing it now meant something different than it had an hour ago, and he could not name what. He crossed it anyway. He went down the staircase one step at a time like an old man, and he found Mrs. Ruth Freeman standing at the foot of the stairs with her bonnet already tied under her chin and a small carpet bag in her hand. "You're going too," he said. "Yes, sir. Tonight. Within the hour, sir. The second carriage is being readied." There is a storm, Ruth. There has been a storm in this house for 4 years, Mr. Hale. One more on the road won't trouble me. He absorbed that the way a man absorbs a slow-moving blow. He did not flinch. He no longer had the strength to flinch. Did she say anything? He asked. When she came down, did she say anything to you? She said the kettle was on, sir. She said I should take it off before I followed. That is all. That is all. She did not weep in the carriage. Mrs. Freeman regarded him a long moment. There was no cruelty in her face. There was something worse. There was pity. Mr. Hale, she said quietly, Miss Abigail did her weeping a long time ago. She did it where you couldn't see. She did it into her pillow the first year. She did it into the ledgers the second. By the third year, she had done all the weeping a body can do, and after that, she just got to work. There ain't no tears left in her tonight, sir. You used them all up before you ever raised the question. He put his hand on the banister. Ruth. Sir. Where is she going? I won't tell you that, sir. Ruth, please. The word came out of him strange and cracked, and Mrs. Freeman heard it, and she heard what it cost him, and she still did not tell him. I work for Miss Abigail now, Mr. Hale. I work for her free, and I work for her for wages, and I have worked for her in my own particular way since she was 9 years old, and brought me a glass of buttermilk in her father's kitchen the first day I walked free. You'll understand if my loyalty is settled. It was settled a long time before tonight, wasn't it? Yes, sir, it was. He nodded slowly. Goodbye, Ruth. Goodbye, Mr. Hale. She did not curtsy. She picked up her carpet bag and walked past him out the front door into a rain that was already beginning to slacken. Nathaniel Hale was alone in his own house for the first time in 5 years, and he discovered with a kind of dull astonishment that he did not know where anything was. He did not know which drawer in the kitchen held the matches. He did not know how to bank the fire in the parlor for the night. He did not know which of the 5 spare keys on the hook by the back door opened the steward's office. He stood in the middle of his own front hall in his wet coat and realized that he had been a guest in this house and his wife had been the master, and neither of them had ever said the word out loud. He found Mr. Pettigrew in the steward's office an hour later, going over the books by the light of 2 candles. The old steward did not stand when Nathaniel came in. That alone told him something. Mr. Pettigrew. Sir. My wife. I know, sir. You knew she was leaving. I have known for 11 days, sir. The number landed strangely. 11 days. He had been in Charleston 11 days ago. He had been in Charleston with Clara Bellamy 11 days ago drinking French brandy on a veranda overlooking the harbor, while his wife in Virginia was packing her ledgers in a trunk. Show me the strong box, Nathaniel said. Yes, sir. Mr. Pettigrew went to the corner of the room and rolled back a small braided rug and pried up a section of floorboard with the back of a letter opener. The strongbox sat beneath iron and dust-covered and surprisingly small for what it contained. Nathaniel knelt on the floor in his wet trousers and turned the brass key in the lock. He read for 2 hours. He read every receipt. He read every promissory note paid by his wife under his name. He read the bank drafts in her father's careful merchant hand. He read a letter dated April of 14 from his sister Eleanor, a letter Nathaniel had never seen in which Eleanor begged Abigail to find some way to save the William and Mary tuition, because her boy would have to be withdrawn otherwise, and Nathaniel had not answered 3 previous letters on the subject. There was a notation on the back in Abigail's small, even handwriting. Sent draft for $240. Told Eleanor not to thank me. She would only tell Nathaniel, and he would be ashamed of the wrong thing. He set the letter down and put both palms flat against the floor and stayed there on his knees in the candlelight, like a man at a long overdue confession. At some point, Mr. Pettigrew set a cup of tea by his elbow without speaking and went back to his desk. By the time the rain stopped, Nathaniel Hale had been on the floor of his own steward's office for half the night, and he had begun finally to understand what he had done. He did not sleep. In the morning, he sent for his attorney. The attorney came on horseback at noon, expecting to be told to file the deed of separation and the maintenance settlement, and instead found Nathaniel at the breakfast table, eating nothing, with a face like a man who had walked out of a shipwreck. "Burn the papers," Nathaniel said. "Sir, burn them, the petition, the maintenance settlement, the Shenandoah deed transfer, all of it. In the parlor fire, where I can see it done. Mr. Hale, sir, these documents have been signed, witnessed. They have not been served." "No, sir, they have not." "Then burn them." The attorney burned them. Nathaniel watched the wax seals melt and the heavy paper curl and blacken on the andirons, and he felt nothing because there was nothing left in him to feel. "What do you wish me to do instead, sir?" "I wish you," Nathaniel said slowly, "to draw up a new instrument. A full and unconditional confirmation of my wife's separate property under the marriage settlement of June 2nd, 1811. I wish her father's trust placed wholly beyond my reach in language so plain that no court in the Commonwealth could ever question it. I wish a further instrument relinquishing any claim of mine, present or future, on any income investment business venture or holding she may acquire under her maiden name. I wish her to have her freedom in writing. I wish it sent to her uncle's law office in Philadelphia by express courier within the week. Sir, that is essentially a financial divorce." "Yes." "Without a divorce?" "Yes." "Mr. Hale, forgive me, but you understand that this leaves you with no protection if she—" "I am aware. And no recourse in the event that—" "I am aware, Mr. Henderson. Draw the papers." The attorney drew the papers. That was the 3rd of August, 1816. She had been gone 5 days. While Nathaniel Hale sat in the wreckage of his marriage and tried for the first time in his life to do a decent thing. Without an audience, his wife was on the post road north of Baltimore in a carriage that smelled of leather and damp wool. Mrs. Freeman sat across from her knitting. Abigail had not spoken in nearly an hour. "You can let it out now, child," Mrs. Freeman said, without looking up from her needles. "I am perfectly well, Ruth." "You are perfectly something. Well ain't the word for it." "I am not going to weep in this carriage." "Then don't weep. Curse then. Throw something out the window. Sing a hymn off key. But don't sit there with your jaw locked like that. You'll grind your teeth to powder before we reach Wilmington." Abigail looked out the carriage window at the dark fields running past. He stood in the doorway. "Ruth," she said very low. He stood there, and he held up that portfolio like a shield, and he opened his mouth to tell me how generous he was being. 300 a year. A maidservant. The use of his uncle's farm. She laughed once, a small dry laugh that was not at all a laugh. 300 a year. "Do you know what I cleared on the cotton contract last spring?" "I know, child. $822 in 1/4, under his name into his account, and he never asked where it came from. He only asked when the next draft would clear so he could go to Washington. I know, child. He was going to send me to a farm, Ruth. I know. Like a retired aunt, like a maiden cousin who had become inconvenient at dinner parties. I know." Abigail turned her face away. Mrs. Freeman knitted 3 more rows before she said in the same quiet voice, "You can hate him, child. It's allowed." "I don't hate him." "That's worse then." "Yes," Abigail said softly. "It is." The carriage went on through the dark. They reached Philadelphia on the 4th day, and Abigail's uncle, Mr. Caleb Whitaker, met them at the door of his counting house on Chestnut Street, with a face that had gone gray at the news and was only just beginning to come back to its color. He did not embrace her. The Whitakers were not embracers. He took both her hands in both of his and held them, and he looked at her and he said, "Your father, child. Your father saw this coming the day he signed that settlement. He told me, Caleb, that boy will not see her until it is too late, and when he does see her, she will already have gone. I did not believe him. I am sorry, I did not believe him. Uncle, you will stay with us. Margaret has the green room ready. We will speak of business tomorrow. Tonight you will sit by my fire, and you will eat something Margaret has cooked, and you will not think about Virginia for one evening if I have to lock the door of the dining room myself. Uncle, I am—" "You are tired, child. I have eyes. Come inside." She came inside. She did not weep that night either, but she ate Margaret Whittaker's chicken pie, and she drank a glass of port. Her uncle pressed into her hand, and somewhere around 10 in the evening, she fell asleep in the green room with her clothes still on and her boots still laced. And Mrs. Freeman came in quietly and unlaced the boots and pulled a quilt up to her chin and sat beside the bed for a long while in the dark. The next morning, Abigail Whittaker and she made her uncle write her name that way on every document, Abigail Whittaker, without the hail, without even the courtesy. Mrs. sat down at her uncle's counting-house table and asked to see the full accounting of her father's trust. Caleb Whittaker laid the books in front of her. She read for 3 hours. Her father, dead these 11 years, had left her a great deal more than Nathaniel Hale had ever suspected. The $15,000 handed over at the wedding had been the smallest part of it, given as a kind of bait to see what manner of man Nathaniel was. The remainder, $62,000, in invested capital, 2 warehouses on the Delaware, a quarter share in a Boston shipping concern, and a small but profitable interest in a New England woolen mill had been held in trust by Caleb Whittaker, accruing quietly untouchable for 11 years. Abigail closed the last book and folded her hands on top of it. Uncle. Yes, child. How much of this can I move today into instruments under my own name, without delay, without my husband's signature? All of it. All of it. Every penny. Every share. Your father wrote the trust in such a way that on your written request, witnessed and notarized, the entire corpus passes to you as a feme sole trader under the laws of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You become a merchant in your own right. The instrument was filed in this very county. Hale has no standing here. He never did. She nodded once. Then file it. Today. Today, child. Today, uncle. He filed it that afternoon. By sundown on the 7th of August, 1816, Miss Abigail Whittaker of Philadelphia was a woman of independent means, a registered feme sole trader, and the sole owner of properties and investments worth, by Caleb Whittaker's careful pencil, somewhere in the neighborhood of $78,000. That was twice the value of Hale House and all its land combined. Her husband did not know this. Her husband at that hour was riding the perimeter of Hale House on a horse he had not ridden in 2 years, looking at fields he had not walked in 3, asking his foreman questions about crop rotations. He should have known the answers to himself, and getting answers that all began gently. Well, sir, Miss Abigail had us doing it this way, on account of... He nearly broke down twice that afternoon. He did not. He was a Hale, and Hales did not weep. His uncles had told him that often enough that the lesson had taken. But on the 3rd, Miss Abigail had us doing it this way. He turned his horse aside and rode for 15 minutes along a fence line where his foreman could not see his face. Back in Philadelphia, Mr. Caleb Whittaker laid down his pen at his counting-house table that evening and looked across at his niece and said, "Now then, what do you intend to do?" "I intend to work, uncle." "You have no need to work, child. You could live very comfortably on the income of these holdings alone in any city in the Republic for the rest of your natural life." "I know." "Then why?" She thought about that. "Because," she said slowly, "for 5 years a man told me without ever quite saying the words that I was ornamental, that I was decoration, that the work I did was small work, women's work, household work not worth his notice. And I want, uncle, I want just once in this life to do a piece of work so large and so plain that no one in any room I walk into will ever again be able to mistake me for decoration." Caleb Whittaker looked at his niece for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and refilled her wine glass and his own, and he raised his. "To the Whittaker name," he said. "To the Whittaker name," she answered. They drank. The next morning she wrote a letter to a man in Boston named Elias Mercer, whose name had appeared 3 times in her father's old correspondence as a young captain of unusual integrity, and she introduced herself as Miss Abigail Whittaker, daughter of the late Josiah Whittaker, and she inquired with great courtesy, and no mention whatever, of any husband whether Mr. Mercer might have an hour at his Boston counting-house in the 2nd week of September to discuss a possible expansion of certain shipping concerns in which her family held a quarter interest. She sealed the letter. She gave it to her uncle's clerk for the post, And while that letter rode north on the Boston packet, news of a rather different sort began to ride south. It rode in whispers the way all such news rides. It went first along the Philadelphia merchant houses, a clerk to a clerk to a counting house keeper, a counting house keeper to a coffee house regular. By the end of the second week of August, it had reached Baltimore. By the third week, Richmond. By the fourth, the drawing rooms of Charleston. The news was this Mrs. Nathaniel Hale of Virginia had left her husband. She had left him without scandal. She had left him without a public quarrel. She had left him, the whisperers said, with a particular relish, with her own carriage and her own money, and her own freedwoman, and her own ledgers, in a plain gray gown, in the middle of a thunderstorm, while he stood on the staircase and watched. The whisperers did not entirely have the staircase right, but they had the rest. In Charleston, on a veranda overlooking the harbor, Mrs. Clara Bellamy received this news from a cousin over morning chocolate. She set her cup down very carefully in its saucer. "Left him," she repeated. "Quite gone, dearest. Philadelphia, they say, or perhaps Boston. The Whitaker uncle has taken her in." "And Nathaniel?" "Nathaniel," her cousin said, "has not been seen in Charleston in 3 weeks. Nor written, dearest." Mrs. Bellamy was silent a long moment. She was a clever woman. She had not survived 2 husbands and a great deal of unpleasantness in between by being slow. "Well," she said at last, "how fascinating." "Fascinating, dearest. Fascinating," Clara Bellamy repeated, and she picked up her chocolate again, and she did not say another word about Nathaniel Hale that morning, or that week, or that month. She was not a woman who chased a man whose wife had become overnight the more interesting subject of conversation in every drawing room from Savannah to Boston. She had standards. She would not be the consolation prize in a scandal she could not control. That was the end of Clara Bellamy and Nathaniel Hale's life, though Nathaniel did not yet know it. He learned of it through silence. 2 letters he sent to Charleston in late August went unanswered. A third in September came back unopened with a polite note from her butler, regretting that Mrs. Bellamy was traveling indefinitely and could not be reached. Nathaniel read the butler's note twice, and then folded it and put it in the fire and watched it burn, and felt to his great surprise almost nothing. He had thought he loved Clara Bellamy. He discovered in the moment that letter went up the chimney that what he had loved was the idea of being loved by Clara Bellamy. That had been a different thing entirely, and that idea, like the note, took less than a minute to burn. What he could not burn was the brass key on the blue ribbon which he carried in his waistcoat pocket, now every day the way a penitent carries a relic. Nor could he burn the letter that arrived from Mr. Henderson on the 11th of September, enclosing a notarized acknowledgment from the Philadelphia office of one Mr. Caleb Whitaker, attorney at law, confirming receipt of the new instrument of separate property, and confirming further in a single line of dry merchant prose that nearly took Nathaniel's breath, that the addressed party, meaning Abigail, is presently engaged in business affairs of a substantial nature in the cities of Philadelphia and Boston, and is not at this date in residence at any address she has authorized this office to disclose. Business affairs of a substantial nature. Nathaniel read that phrase 3 times. He did not know yet what it meant, but he knew with a cold certainty that whatever his wife was doing in those 2 cities, it was larger than a small farm in the Shenandoah Valley. Vastly larger. He set the letter down on his desk in the steward's office beside the brass key on the blue ribbon, and he sat very still in the chair, and after a long while he said aloud to no one, "I see." He did not see. Not yet. But he was beginning to. That same afternoon in a counting house on State Street in Boston, Mr. Elias Mercer broke the seal of a letter from Philadelphia and read it twice. He was 34 years old. He was a shipowner. He was an abolitionist. He was by reputation the most particular man in the New England trade, a man who turned away 3 offers of partnership for every one he accepted. He read the letter from Miss Abigail Whitaker a 3rd time. He noted the phrasing. He noted the figures referenced. He noted with a small private smile the absolute absence of any softness or apology in the prose. He took out a clean sheet of paper. He dipped his pen. "Dear Miss Whitaker," he wrote, Your father was by my own father's account the most honest merchant on the Delaware in his generation. I shall be at your service at any hour you name in the 2nd week of September, the 3rd week or any week thereafter for the remainder of my natural life. Yours respectfully, Elias Mercer. He sealed it. He gave it to his clerk for the next packet south. And then, because he was a careful man, and because he had read his Whitaker correspondence carefully, he made a single discreet inquiry that afternoon through a cousin in Richmond, and by the end of the week he had received in confidence the information that Miss Whitaker was the same person formerly known as Mrs. Nathaniel Hale of Hale House, Virginia. Elias Mercer absorbed this information without expression. Then he put on his hat and walked the 4 blocks to his bank, and he opened in his own name an additional line of credit of $50,000 for the purposes, as he wrote on the form, of expanding existing shipping interests in partnership with a new associate from Philadelphia. He did not yet know whether Miss Abigail Whitaker would accept his partnership. He intended to make sure that when she did, he was ready for her. He had the distinct impression from her letter that Reddy was going to require rather more capital than he had originally estimated. He was not wrong about that. In Virginia, the leaves had begun to turn. The tobacco was nearly in. Nathaniel Hale rode the fields every morning now from before sunrise to past noon, learning his own land for the first time in his life. He spoke to his foreman with a humility that astonished the foreman. He spoke to Mr. Pettigrew with a humility that astonished even Mr. Pettigrew, who had served Hale House for 31 years. He paid the kitchen wages out of his own pocket on the 1st of September in coin before they were asked for. He found Mrs. Freeman's old apron hanging on a peg by the back door, and he could not bring himself to take it down, and so he left it there, and the new housekeeper, a quiet widow from the village named Mrs. Latimer, left it there too, and a year later it was still hanging on that peg, slowly fading like a flag of a country he had once misruled. He did not write to his wife. He wanted to. He wanted to 100 times a day, but he had given her in writing her freedom from his name, and he understood late but at last that a letter from him in the first months after such a gift would be a letter that took the gift back. So he did not write. He waited. He did not yet know what he was waiting for. He only knew in the long evenings in the steward's office with the brass key on the blue ribbon set on the desk in front of him, like a reminder and a rebuke, that the woman he had been married to for 5 years had been a stranger to him on the day she left, and that the only way back to her, if there was a way at all, which he did not dare assume would be the slow road of becoming at long last a man worthy of her notice. He was not such a man yet. He suspected the journey would take years. He set himself to it without complaint. And in Philadelphia, on a clear, cold morning in the 3rd week of September, 1816, Miss Abigail Whitaker stepped down from a hired chaise in front of a counting house on State Street in Boston in a traveling cloak the color of slate with a portfolio under her arm, and Mrs. Ruth Freeman 1 pace behind her, and she paused on the step and looked up at the sign above the door, which read, Mercer and Keogh, Shipping and Trade. And she drew one long breath of cold harbor air, and she did not allow herself even for a moment to think of the man in Virginia who had once stood in her chamber doorway, holding a portfolio and a plan to send her to a small farm. She thought instead of her father. Your father saw this coming, her uncle had said. He told me that boy will not see her until it is too late. Well, it was too late. And Miss Abigail Whitaker pushed open the door of Mercer and Company and walked in her plain gray gown beneath her slate-colored cloak into the room where the second half of her life was waiting. Elias Mercer was already on his feet before his clerk could announce her. He had been at the high desk by the window in his shirt sleeves, with a column of figures half finished beneath his pen, and he set the pen down without blotting it, and crossed the room with a stride that was neither hurried nor slow, only certain. He stopped 3 paces from her. He did not extend his hand. He bowed plain and unfussy the way merchants bowed to merchants. Miss Whitaker. Mr. Mercer. Your father was a great man, ma'am. My father was a stubborn man, Mr. Mercer. The greatness was incidental. Elias Mercer almost laughed. He caught it before it reached his mouth. He gestured instead toward the inner door of his counting house. Will you sit, ma'am? My clerk will bring tea. I will sit. I will not take tea. I have come to talk business, and I find tea slows business by a quarter hour every time it is offered." "As you wish." Mrs. Freeman was given a chair by the front window. Abigail was given a chair across the desk from Mr. Mercer's. The clerk withdrew. The door clicked shut. Abigail laid her portfolio on the desk and opened it. "I will be brief, Mr. Mercer. Please. My father held a quarter share in your father's shipping concern from the year 1803. That share passed to me in trust in the year 1805 on his death. It has been administered by my uncle Caleb Whitaker of Philadelphia for 11 years. I am informed by my uncle that the quarterly returns have been steady, and that you, in particular, since assuming control of the firm in 1813, have been scrupulous in your accountings to a degree that he describes as, and I quote, almost suspicious." This time Elias Mercer did laugh. "Your uncle," he said, "is a careful man." "He is. So am I. I gather. Mr. Mercer." She closed the portfolio without taking anything out of it. "I did not come to Boston to be a quarter-share investor in your shipping concern. I came to be a half-share partner in it." He went still. "Ma'am." "You heard me, sir?" A half-share." "Yes. Miss Whitaker, the firm is presently valued at $120,000. A half-share would require $60,000. Yes, I am aware. I am prepared to put up 40 in capital, and the remaining 20 against my existing quarter share at fair market valuation. My uncle has the figures drawn. They are at his Philadelphia office awaiting your approval, and they are fair to within $1. Mr. Mercer set both his hands flat on the desk. He looked at her a long moment. "Why?" he said. "Why what, sir?" "Why a half-share? Why not stay a quiet quarter? The returns are good. The risk is small. A half-partnership puts your name on the door, ma'am, and your name on every cargo, and your reputation answerable for every loss. A half-partnership in this trade means rooms full of men who will not want you in those rooms. I am aware of those rooms, Mr. Mercer, and you wish to enter them anyway." "I have spent 5 years," Abigail said quietly, "in a room where I was not wanted by the one man whose room it was. I find I am no longer afraid of rooms." Elias Mercer looked at her. He looked at her for what was, by the small clock on his mantel, the better part of half a minute. And in that half-minute, he revised completely the plan he had drawn up the previous week. The plan in which he would offer her a 1/3 partnership at a generous valuation and steer her gently toward the silent end of it, where a respectable widow might accept profits without the burden of public business. He revised it, and he discarded it, and he reached across his desk and he said, "Miss Whitaker, I will accept your terms. I will accept them today. I will accept them. I should add, against the strenuous objection of my own attorney, who told me last week that any woman walking through that door was to be offered 1/3 and not 1 penny of operational authority. I am about to give him a difficult afternoon. I find I do not mind." "Then we are partners, Mr. Mercer." "We are, ma'am. Half and half. Half and half." He held out his hand. She took it. They shook once, plain and firm, the way 2 men in a Boston counting house would shake on a deal worth $60,000 and a great deal of risk. That handshake was at 11 minutes past 10 in the morning on the 22nd of September, 1816. By noon, Mr. Mercer's attorney had been called in and informed. By 3, he had stopped objecting. By the end of the week, the new partnership papers were filed in 2 cities, and a small notice appeared in the back pages of the Boston Daily Advertiser announcing that Mercer and Company shippers had taken on a new partner under the name A. Whitaker of Philadelphia, with no further comment. 3 men in 3 different counting houses on State Street read that notice over their morning coffee that week and made the same private remark to their clerks, A. Whitaker. "That'll be Josiah's daughter, then." Well, well. 2 of them sent letters of congratulation by the end of the day. The third sent a letter of inquiry to Richmond, to a cousin who knew the Hale family, asking quietly whether the rumor he had heard at his club was true. He received 10 days later a reply of 1 short paragraph confirming that yes, the lady in question was the same lady, and yes, she had left Hale House in August, and yes, she appeared to be operating under her maiden name, with the full backing of her uncle's house. The third man read this letter twice. Then he laid it aside, took out a fresh sheet of paper, and wrote his own letter of congratulation to Miss Whitaker on her partnership with Mercer and Company, enclosing a small bouquet of preliminary business propositions, and ending with a line that he had thought about for several minutes before committing to ink Boston is fortunate, ma'am, in its new merchant. He was not the last man to write such a letter that autumn. By the end of October, Miss Abigail Whitaker had taken rooms in a respectable boarding house on Beacon Street, hired a clerk of her own at $30 a month, opened correspondence with 11 separate trading houses from Salem to Charleston, and quietly bought through Mr. Mercer's broker a 1/8 interest in a small woolen mill outside Lowell that her father's papers had long identified as undervalued. She did not write to Virginia. Not once. In Virginia, the autumn came in hard and dry. The tobacco came in well. Nathaniel Hale stood in his own barn on a cool morning in the second week of October and watched his foreman tally the harvest, and when the foreman finished and read the figures aloud, Nathaniel realized that the crop was the largest Hale house had brought in 7 years. "How?" he said. "Sir, how is it the largest in 7 years?" The foreman shifted his weight. "Well, sir, Miss Abigail had us put in the lower 40 in the new way 2 springs back. The deeper plowing. The Pennsylvania method, she called it. We argued some with her at the time. She paid for the seed herself out of her own purse so we'd try it. The lower 40 come in at near double what it used to." Nathaniel said nothing. "And she contracted the buyers, sir. Last spring, through Mr. Pettigrew. Got us 8 cents a pound where the rest of the county is taking 6.5. The contracts are still good through next harvest." Nathaniel said nothing. "It's a good crop, sir," the foreman said gently. "It's the best crop this place has seen since your daddy's last year. I just thought you ought to know whose work it was." "I know whose work it was, Hutchins." "Yes, sir. I have known. I am only just learning the size of it." The foreman tipped his hat and went back to his tally, and Nathaniel walked out of his own barn into the cold sun and stood for a long while with his hand on the gatepost and a feeling in his chest like a man who has been swimming in deep water for a long time and only at this moment realized he can no longer see the shore. That evening, he sent for an investigator out of Richmond, a discreet man named Mr. Pickett, who had once handled a delicate matter for Nathaniel's late uncle, and Nathaniel said to him plainly, "I wish to know where my wife is and how she fares. I do not wish her disturbed. I do not wish her addressed. I do not wish her even to know that an inquiry has been made. I wish only to know." "Yes, sir. You will report directly to me. You will commit nothing to paper that could fall into the wrong hands. You will not approach her. You will not approach her uncle. You will simply find out." "Yes, sir." "Mr. Pickett." "Sir." "Whatever you learn, you will tell me the whole of it. The plain truth. Without softening." Mr. Pickett, a man who had spent 30 years in his trade, looked at the man across the desk and said, "Mr. Hale, I do not soften my reports. I have found that gentlemen who pay for the truth are generally insulted when they get less than what they paid for." "Good," Nathaniel said. "Then we understand each other." Mr. Pickett left for Philadelphia the next morning. He returned to Hale House on a cold, rainy afternoon in the second week of November. Nathaniel received him in the steward's office. The brass key on the blue ribbon was lying as it had lain every evening for 3 months on the desk between the inkwell and the candle. Mr. Pickett did not remark on it. He had been informed indirectly of its existence. "Sir." "Mr. Pickett, sit, speak." Mr. Pickett sat. He did not open the small black book in his coat. He had committed his report to memory. Miss Whitaker, sir, is residing at present in Boston, in a respectable boarding house on Beacon Street, operated by a Mrs. Eustace Pell, widow of the late Captain Pell of the Boston Merchant Marine. Her rooms are clean, well kept, and not lavish. She keeps a clerk, a stable, and the constant company of one Mrs. Ruth Freeman, formerly of this household. Nathaniel nodded once. "She is in good health, sir. Her appearance is by all accounts much as it always was. She walks to her counting house each morning. She returns each evening. She takes her meals at the boarding house, except on those occasions when she dines by invitation at one or another of the principal merchant tables of the city. The principal merchant tables. Yes, sir. Mr. Mercer's naturally, Mr. Cabot's, Mr. Lowell's, the Honorable Judge Story's on 2 occasions. The Reverend Channing has had her to dinner 3 times since October. Nathaniel stared at him. William Ellery Channing. The same, sir. Has had Miss Whittaker to dinner 3 times. 3 times in 6 weeks, sir, by the report of his own housekeeper to mine. Apparently, the lady is much engaged in certain reform societies that have his particular interest. The relief of the poor, schools for the children of free Negroes, the early advocacy for the protection of married women's separate property under the laws of the Commonwealth. Nathaniel laid his hand flat on the desk. He did not speak. Sir? Continue, Mr. Pickett. Miss Whittaker is, as of the 2nd of November, a half-partner in the firm of Mercer and Company of Boston. The firm currently operates 4 vessels in the coastal trade and 2 in the West India trade, and has since her arrival opened negotiations on the purchase of a 3rd. She has personally underwritten the purchase of an additional 8th interest in the Merrimack Woolen Mill of Lowell, which I am informed is a quietly profitable concern. She holds jointly with her uncle the whole of her father's old trust, which was, as you may not know, considerably larger than was generally supposed at the time of your marriage. How large, Mr. Pickett? At this date, sir, including her partnership in Mercer and Company, her mill interest, her 2 warehouses on the Delaware, and her cash reserves at the Suffolk Bank of Boston, I estimate her holdings at not less than $96,000. Nathaniel did not move. 96,000. Conservatively, sir. The figure may be higher. Mercer and Company has had a strong autumn, and her quarter from the woolen mill has not yet been declared. 96,000. Yes, sir. My entire estate, Mr. Pickett. Land, house, stock, fields, tools, slaves. I do not own laborers, I beg pardon. Every item of value upon these 400 acres. The total by the assessor's last accounting was $41,000. Yes, sir. I am aware. Nathaniel put his hand to his face and pressed his palm flat against his eyes for a long moment. She is twice me, Mr. Pickett. Sir, she is more than twice you, and I do not say it to wound. I say it because you instructed me not to soften. I did instruct you so. There is one further matter, sir. Speak. Miss Whittaker is to deliver public remarks at a meeting of the Boston Society for the Relief of Indigent Women and Children on the 17th day of December at the Old South Meeting House at 3 in the afternoon. Mr. Channing will introduce her. The notice has been printed in the Columbian Sentinel. The meeting is open to the general public. Public remarks. Yes, sir. From the platform. My Miss Whittaker, from a platform, at the Old South Meeting House, with William Ellery Channing introducing her. Yes, sir. There was a very long silence in the steward's office. The brass key on the blue ribbon lay between them on the desk. Nathaniel's hand moved toward it without his conscious permission, and his fingers closed around it, and he held it, and he did not look at Mr. Pickett. Thank you, Mr. Pickett. Sir, you will be paid by Friday. You will speak of this report to no one. To no one, sir. Go, please. Mr. Pickett went. Nathaniel Hale sat at the desk in the steward's office for the rest of that afternoon, and through supper, which he did not eat, and into the evening with the brass key clenched in his fist and his mind running over and over along the same single track, 96,000. The Reverend Channing's table, a platform at the Old South. He had imagined her all autumn in some small boarding house, perhaps reduced, perhaps regretful, perhaps living quietly on the trust her uncle had pieced together. He had imagined her at his most honest, well-comfortable but small, a merchant's spinster niece, in 2 rooms with a maid. He had not imagined her speaking from a platform. He had not imagined her on the same dinner list as William Ellery Channing. He had not imagined her in 3 short months as the wealthier party to a marriage that no longer existed. Around midnight he rose from the desk. He went into the hall. He took down his greatcoat from the peg by the door. He put it on. Mrs. Latimer, the new housekeeper, came out of the back hall with a candle and saw him. Sir, at this hour. I am going north, Mrs. Latimer. Sir, the roads. Pack me a small valise, 2 shirts, 2 cravats, the plain dark coat. I leave at first light. Sir, where? Boston. Nathaniel Hale said. I am going to Boston. Yes, sir. She did not ask why. She did not need to. The whole of Hale House had heard by then the same whispers that had reached the rest of the country, and Mrs. Latimer was a clever woman, and she understood that the master was finally going to go look on the wreckage of what he had done. She packed the valise. She left the brass key on the blue ribbon out on the dresser where he would see it. Nathaniel saw it and put it in his waistcoat pocket and did not take it out again for the duration of the journey. He arrived in Boston on the 16th of December. He took rooms at a small inn in the West End, not at the Tremont, where he might have been recognized under a half-pseudonym Mr. N. Whitfield of Richmond, which was his middle name, and would not raise comment if it were spoken aloud at any drawing-room table. He did not call on his wife. He had not come to call on her. He did not even know in his own heart what he had come for. He only knew that on the 17th of December, at 3 o'clock, he would be at the Old South Meeting House in the back row in his plain dark coat, and he would hear her speak, and after that, he did not know what he would do, only that he could not bear to read of it, second-hand in a Richmond paper a month after the fact. The 17th of December was cold and bright. He arrived at the meeting house at 2:20, and found it already 3/4 full. He took a seat in the back in the shadow of the gallery and folded his hands in his lap and waited. The hall filled. The crowd was not what he had expected. There were merchants. Yes, he had expected the merchants. But there were also ministers in plain black and women in plainer dress than his own wife had ever worn at Hale House, and a row of young men from the divinity school with notebooks open across their knees, and 3 Quakers in their gray, and at least 1 black gentleman in a fine wool coat, seated near the front, who was greeted by name by half the people who passed him. This was not a drawing room. This was a working hall. His wife had become the kind of woman who spoke in working halls. The Reverend Channing rose. He spoke for 10 minutes. Nathaniel did not hear most of it. He heard fragments, a most uncommon understanding of the practical means by which charity may be made permanent, a clarity of head and warmth of heart that I have rarely encountered in any merchant of any age, Miss Abigail Whittaker of Philadelphia. And then she rose. She rose in a dark gray gown, almost the same as the one she had worn the night she left Virginia, with her hair in the same simple knot, with no jewels, no lace, no ornament whatever, and she walked to the front of the platform, and she set her hands on the rail of the lectern, and she looked out at the hall. She did not see him. He was certain of that. She looked out calm and steady, and she said in a voice that carried clean to the back wall without strain, "Friends, I will not waste your afternoon." And she did not. She spoke for 22 minutes. She spoke about a small school in Charlestown for the daughters of widows that the society had funded the previous spring. She spoke about the difficulty those widows had encountered in opening accounts at any bank in the Commonwealth, because the law of coverture in Massachusetts was, in her exact phrase, a stone tied to the neck of every woman whose husband proved unequal to his vows. She spoke about a proposed amendment to the property statutes that would permit a married woman to hold separate earnings under her own name. She spoke about the cost of the school. She spoke about the dignity of the children. She did not raise her voice. She did not lower it. She did not flatter the room. She did not apologize for being in it, and in the back row in a plain dark coat, under a half-name he had given the innkeeper because he could not bear to give his real one. Nathaniel Hale heard his wife's voice command a public hall for the first time in his life, and he understood with a clarity that was almost physical that he had been married for 5 years to a woman he had never once allowed himself to actually meet. She had not become this in 3 months. This had been in her the whole time in his house at his table in the chamber he had walked into 100 times without seeing her, and his cold neglect had simply been the lid on a kettle she had at last walked out from under. He did not know he was crying until he felt the wet on his cravat. He did not move to wipe it. He could not have moved if the hall had caught fire. She finished. She inclined her head once plainly to the Reverend Channing, and she turned to leave the platform. And in turning, she looked for one heartbeat toward the back of the hall. Her eyes passed over the rear gallery without stopping. Then they came back. They came back, and they fixed, and they found him. He saw the small movement at her throat. He saw her hand tighten just once on the rail of the lectern. He saw her face do nothing, nothing at all, in the way that only Abigail's face could do nothing, the way it had done nothing the night she handed him the legal letter in her chamber, the way it had done nothing when he caught her sleeve in the doorway and asked her not to leave in silence. She held his eye for perhaps 3 full seconds. Then she turned her head and stepped down from the platform, and the Reverend Channing took her arm and led her toward a side room, and she did not look back. The hall began to rise. Conversations began. Chairs scraped. Nathaniel Hale sat in the back row in the plain dark coat and could not stand. A young divinity student in the row in front of him turned at length and said politely, "Sir, are you unwell?" "I am quite well," Nathaniel said. "I am quite well. Thank you, sir." "Thank you. I have only just realized something about a woman." The young student smiled the way young men smile at older men in such moments. "That happens, sir," he said gently. "It happens to most of us." "Not like this," Nathaniel said. "Not like this, son." He rose finally and walked out of the Old South Meeting House into the cold December afternoon. And he stood on the steps for a long moment with the wind cutting through his coat, and he did not go back to the inn. He walked instead all the way down to the harbor, and he stood at the foot of the long wharf, and he looked out at the masts of the Mercer and Company ships, 3 of them in port that day, with the Whittaker, the new one, the third one, the one she had bought in October, riding at the deepest mooring, and he understood at long last the size of the woman he had thrown away. He stood on that wharf until the sun went down behind the warehouses. He did not call on her that evening. He did not call on her the next day. He did not in fact call on her at all that winter. He returned to Virginia on the 23rd of December, and he spent Christmas alone in the steward's office of Hale House, with the brass key on the blue ribbon laid on the desk in front of him, and he began in the slow, steady hand of a man who had finally understood the price of his own life to write a letter he would not send for another 7 months. The letter sat in the top drawer of the steward's desk through the long Virginia winter, and Nathaniel Hale did not seal it. He wrote a paragraph in January. He tore the paragraph out and rewrote it in February. In March he added a second page. In April, he removed the second page entirely because, reading it back, he saw that it had begun to sound here and there like a man asking forgiveness, and he had decided very early in the writing that this letter would not ask for any forgiveness whatever. It would only state plain facts plainly, and offer at the end of those facts a single thing, and only the one that he believed his wife might find of use. By the time he sealed it in late July of 1817, he had been at it for 7 months. He did not know sealing it that he would not be the one to deliver it. Trouble came to Boston before the letter did. It came in the form of one Mr. Silas Crow, a land speculator out of New York with a bank in his pocket and 3 failed land schemes behind him, who had set his eye on the Merrimack woolen mill that spring and had been quietly patiently buying up the small holdings around it for the better part of 4 months. Mr. Crow had a plan. The plan required before the autumn the failure of the mill's principal investors so that the controlling interest would come on the market at a distress price. He had identified those investors. He had identified the largest of them, a Miss Abigail Whittaker of Philadelphia, late of Boston, presently a half-partner in Mercer and Company, and he had identified, too, the particular weakness she would present. She was a woman. The weakness was that simple. Mr. Crow believed sincerely that a single well-placed roomer in the right counting house would do. In her case, what it would take 3 months and a real bank failure to do in a man's. He believed it because in 26 years of his trade, he had never been wrong about it. He set his rumor in motion in the 2nd week of June. It went out through 3 particular men in 3 particular Boston coffee houses, and the substance of it was this: that the new partnership at Mercer and Company had been concealing losses, that the Whittaker, the new vessel acquired in October of the previous year, had been overinsured against a cargo it had never actually carried, that the underwriters were beginning to ask questions, and that most damaging of all Miss Whittaker's true financial position was not what her uncle in Philadelphia had represented it to be, and the woolen mill investment had been undertaken with borrowed paper that was now coming due. None of it was true. That did not slow it down. By the third week of June, two of Mercer and Company's smaller correspondents in Salem had asked politely for early settlements on outstanding accounts. By the last week of June, the Suffolk Bank had sent a clerk to the counting house on State Street to inquire informally, "You understand, ma'am, whether Miss Whitaker would consider providing additional collateral on her line." By the first week of July, a Philadelphia merchant who had committed to a shared cargo on the Whitaker withdrew from the agreement and gave a reason that was not a reason. Elias Mercer came into Abigail's office on the morning of the 8th of July with his coat unbuttoned and his color high, and he closed the door behind him and said without sitting, "Someone is doing this to us on purpose." "Yes. You knew." "I knew on Tuesday." "Tuesday. And you did not." "I did not tell you on Tuesday because on Tuesday I did not yet know who. As of this morning, I do." He sat down then. Crow. "How?" "I had Mr. Pettigrew's nephew in New York make a quiet inquiry. The nephew owed me a favor. The nephew has a friend at the Manhattan Company. Mr. Crow has in the last 11 days drawn down $22,000 in cash from his line there with no recorded application of the funds. The funds are not in his usual channels. They are not in any channel I can trace. They are simply gone into the rumor. 22,000 to break us. To break me, Mr. Mercer. He does not care about you. He does not even know your name properly. He thinks the firm is mine because mine is the name he hears in the coffee houses. That is the part I find in a strange way useful." "Useful?" "Yes, he has built his entire scheme on the assumption that I am the weak link. He is not preparing for you. He is preparing for me to weep in a parlor and sell at a loss. That is his plan. And our plan. Our plan, Mr. Mercer, is that I am not going to weep and we are not going to sell. And within 30 days, Mr. Crow is going to discover that $22,000 buys a great deal less in Boston in 1817 than it bought in New York in 1815. Elias Mercer looked at her across the desk. He had spent 10 months at this desk across from her now. He had seen her negotiate 3 cargo contracts, fire 2 clerks, hire 1 captain, refuse 1 bribe, and pay 1 bonus. And in not one of those transactions had he seen her raise her voice, or hesitate, or look even for a moment like a woman who was not absolutely certain of what she intended to do next. He saw in that moment that he had fallen rather seriously in love with her. He also saw in the same moment that he was not going to say so to her. Not now. Possibly not ever. Because she did not need a suitor. She needed a partner. And he had given his word last September on a handshake in this same room that a partner was what he would be. He cleared his throat. "What do you require of me, Miss Whitaker?" "I require, Mr. Mercer, that you go to your bank this afternoon and request a private interview with Mr. Appleton." "Not the clerk. Mr. Appleton himself. I require you to lay before him the full books of Mercer and Company for the last 12 months. Every voyage, every cargo, every insurance policy, every settlement. I require him to see with his own eyes that the Whitaker sailed in October with a cargo of cured fish and Massachusetts woolens valued at $11,412, and that cargo was duly delivered at Bridgetown on the 23rd of November, and that the underwriting was clean. He will see it, ma'am. I require him further to understand that any rumor to the contrary is not a misunderstanding. It is a deliberate act by a named individual for a named purpose, and I am prepared to make that name and that purpose extremely public if the rumor is not corrected within the week. Yes, ma'am. And Mr. Mercer. Ma'am, you will not in that interview mention my name once. The firm will speak as the firm, not as my firm, not as your firm, as the firm. We do not give Mr. Crow the satisfaction of being the man who attacked a woman. We give him instead the inconvenience of being the man who attacked a Boston shipping house. The first is interesting, the second is dull. Mr. Appleton's bank does not lend to interesting, it lends to dull. Make us very dull this afternoon, Mr. Mercer. Miss Whitaker, Elias Mercer said quietly. I do not believe I have ever met a person of any sex who understood as much about a bank as you do. My father was a merchant, Mr. Mercer. Yes, ma'am, he was, and he did all right. But I believe his daughter is going to do better. He bowed and left. That was the 8th of July. By the 15th, the rumor in the coffee houses was beginning to limp. By the 22nd, it had been corrected in writing by Mr. Appleton himself in a small letter to a colleague at the Boston Marine Insurance Company that was passed by careful hands to 3 more colleagues by the end of the day. By the 30th, the Salem correspondents who had asked for early settlements wrote back in some embarrassment, withdrawing their requests. Mr. Silas Crow in New York read the changing weather in the Boston papers and the Boston letters and understood by the 1st of August that his rumor had not done its work and that $22,000 of his ready capital had vanished into thin air. He came to Boston on the 3rd of August in person. He came expecting to negotiate. He arrived at the counting house of Mercer & Company at 10 in the morning, and he sent in his card, and he was kept waiting in the front room for 47 minutes, and at 10 of the 11th hour he was shown in to Miss Whittaker's office, and he discovered that Miss Whittaker was not alone. There were 4 other persons in the room. Mr. Elias Mercer, behind his own desk by the window. Mr. Caleb Whittaker of Philadelphia, who had ridden up at his niece's request 2 days before. A Mr. Ezra Foss of the Suffolk Bank, lent for the morning by Mr. Appleton himself. And in the corner, taking notes, a young man whom Mr. Crow did not recognize, but who turned out to be a junior reporter from the Columbian Sentinel present at Miss Whittaker's specific written invitation. Mr. Crow understood at once that he had walked into something he had not prepared for. He sat down anyway. Abigail did not waste his time. Mr. Crow, you drew $22,000 from the Manhattan Company between the 7th and the 20th of June. I know the dates. I know the amounts. I know the 4 men in this city through whom you placed that money. I have signed statements from 2 of those 4. I have in this drawer an affidavit from a clerk in your own New York office attesting that you instructed him on the 2nd of June to begin acquiring options on small holdings adjacent to the Merrimack Woolen Mill in anticipation of a forced sale of the controlling interest. The forced sale was by the affidavit's plain language to be precipitated by the financial embarrassment of a named lady investor. Mr. Crow began to speak. She raised one hand and he stopped. I am not finished, sir. Madam, I have at this moment in a sealed packet at my uncle's chambers in Philadelphia copies of every document I have just described. Mr. Foss of the Suffolk Bank has read them. He will so attest. Mr. Mercer has read them. He will so attest. The young gentleman in the corner has not read them. He has only been informed that they exist. If you and I do not come to a satisfactory understanding in the next 20 minutes, Mr. Crow, the young gentleman in the corner, will be invited to read them this afternoon, and the substance of them will be in the Columbian Sentinel by Wednesday morning and in the New York papers by Friday. Mr. Crow had gone the color of cold mutton. Miss Whittaker, madam, surely there is no need for— There is every need, sir. I will tell you what the satisfactory understanding looks like. You will withdraw in writing every option you have placed against the holdings adjacent to the Merrimack Mill. You will sell those options at cost to my uncle's firm in Philadelphia by the close of business on Friday. You will sign in the presence of Mr. Foss a sworn statement acknowledging that the rumors circulated against Mercer & Company in June and July were placed by your direction and were without factual foundation. That statement will not be published. Mr. Crow, not unless you give me cause. It will sit in my uncle's chambers as insurance against any further attempt of yours in any city, in any year, to do to any lady investor what you attempted to do to me. Madam, you cannot— I can, sir, and I have. There remains only the question of whether you wish to leave this office a poorer man, or a poorer and a publicly ruined man. The choice is entirely yours. I would advise you to make it within the next 10 minutes because Mr. Foss is due back at his bank at noon. Mr. Silas Crow sat in the chair across from Miss Abigail Whittaker of Philadelphia and Boston, and he understood with a sick clarity that he had attacked the wrong woman, and that his 26 years of professional certainty about the weakness of women in business had been 26 years of a man too lucky to learn anything. He signed. He signed everything. He left the office at 20 minutes past 11, $8,000 poorer in immediate options, and considerably more poorer in standing, and he never set foot in Boston again, and he did not for the rest of his career attempt that particular play against any woman of any name in any city. Mr. Foss of the Suffolk Bank stood up. "Miss Whitaker?" "Mr. Foss, thank you." "Ma'am, I have been a banker for 41 years. I have never seen anything like that in my life." "You will see it again, Mr. Foss." "Ma'am, you will see it again. Not perhaps from a woman for some years yet. But you will see it again. The trick is not the sex. The trick is the documents. I had the documents because I expected him. He came because he did not expect me. There is a lesson in that, Mr. Foss, but it is for another afternoon." The young reporter from the Sentinel left without his story, but he did not leave empty-handed. He left with the strong impression that a Miss Whitaker of Mercer and Company was not a name to be left out of any future column on the Merchants of Boston, and he so reported in a private memorandum to his editor. Caleb Whitaker, who had said nothing for the entire interview, rose, at last kissed his niece on the forehead and said, "Your father, child, would have laughed himself sick. I should have liked to make him laugh, uncle." "You did, child. I felt him in the room." That same week, the first week of August 1817, Nathaniel Hale in Virginia finally sealed his letter. He sealed it on a Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. He addressed it in a hand he had practiced to Miss Abigail Whitaker, care of Mercer and Company, State Street, Boston. He gave it to a courier, not the post. A private courier, paid in coin, sworn to deliver it into the lady's hands, and no other. And he watched the courier ride away from Hale House and felt for the first time in a year that he had let go of something that had been crushing his chest. The courier reached Boston on the 11th of August. The same week the courier left Virginia, however, Mrs. Clara Bellamy of Charleston arrived in Boston unannounced. She had been told by the same cousin who had once told her of Abigail's leaving that the interesting situation in Boston had grown more interesting still, that Mrs. Hale, formerly so quiet, was now reported to be the principal female merchant in the Commonwealth, and was further reported by certain Charleston tongues that were better at gossip than at geography to have taken up with a Mr. Mercer, an abolitionist of Boston, in a manner that could not possibly be respectable. Clara Bellamy did not believe the taken up with part. She had her own measure of Abigail Hale, and that measure did not include indiscretion. But she had decided in her own counsel that an indiscretion suggested in the right Charleston drawing room could do in 1817 what no rumor she had ever set in motion had previously done, namely, give her back the position she had lost the previous year when Nathaniel Hale's wife had refused to play the role of cast-off mistress, and had, by the simple act of leaving, made Clara herself the consolation prize in a story she could not control. Clara Bellamy had come to Boston, in short, to manufacture a small ruin. She arrived on the 12th of August. The courier from Virginia had arrived on the 11th. Abigail Whitaker held Nathaniel's letter in her hand for an entire afternoon before she opened it. Mrs. Freeman watched her hold it. Mrs. Freeman did not say a word. Mrs. Freeman put a cup of tea by her elbow at 3 o'clock, and another at 5 and a third at 7, and on the third one she said gently, "Child." "Yes, Ruth. It's only paper." "It is not only paper, Ruth. Not from him. Not after a year." "Then read it or burn it. Just don't sit with it." Abigail read it. She read it once. She set it down. She read it again. She set it down. She put both her hands over her face for a long moment, and she did not cry. But Mrs. Freeman saw her shoulders move, once a single small breaking motion, before she straightened them again. "What does he say, child?" "He says, Ruth, he says nothing. I expected him to say. He does not ask me to come back. He does not ask my forgiveness. He does not even Ruth. He does not even defend himself. He simply sets down what he has done, plainly, without color. Every failure of his named. Every debt I paid named. Every year I waited at the window named. He has built the entire indictment against himself, Ruth. He has built it better than I could have. And then, child, then he encloses a deed, Ruth, to Hale House, not the income, the whole thing, the land, the buildings, the fields. Made over to me in my own name under the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia by a private act passed last spring, which he tells me here he obtained personally at his own expense from the legislature in Richmond. He says, Ruth. He says he obtained it because as long as the property remained in his name, his apology was not real. He says, I cannot give you back the years. I can give you the only thing of mine that remains, which is this. Do with it what you wish. Sell it. Burn it. Live in it. It is yours. Mrs. Freeman set down her knitting. That fool man. Ruth. That fool man finally. Ruth, what do I do? Child. Ruth, what do I do? Mrs. Freeman crossed the small parlor and put her old hand on top of Abigail's young one and held it there. You don't do nothing tonight, child. You eat your supper. You sleep. And tomorrow you decide whether the man writing that letter is a man you want to see standing in front of you or a man you want to leave standing in his own confession on the page. Either is a fair answer. Either. And if I want to see him? Then you tell him so, in your time, not his. Abigail nodded once. She did not eat her supper. She did sleep eventually, with the letter on the table by her bed, and the deed folded inside it. In the morning she rose dressed and walked to the counting-house. She had not yet decided what to write when she sat down at her desk. But she had decided one thing in the night, and the one thing was this. She would not write to Nathaniel Hale until she had finished the matter of Clara Bellamy, which had presented itself to her in the form of a calling card sent up by Mrs. Pell at the boarding-house at 7:30 that morning bearing the words, Mrs. Clara Bellamy of Charleston, and beneath them in Clara's own hand, the line, begs the favor of an interview on a matter touching mutual acquaintance. Abigail had read that card over her morning coffee, and had laughed once quietly, the way she had not laughed in 11 months. She had written back in her own hand, Tomorrow at 3 Mrs. Bellamy. At my counting-house. Please come alone. She had sealed it. She had given it to Mrs. Pell. She had finished her coffee, and she had walked out of the boarding-house into a clear August morning with the calm of a woman who had finally been given in the space of 2 days, both the closing argument of her old marriage and the opening argument of whatever her new life was going to be, and who fully intended to deliver each when the moment came in her own voice, in her own counting-house, on her own ground. She arrived at the counting-house at 9:05. The door of Mercer and Company opened to her under a sign that the previous Thursday had been quietly repainted to read in equal letters and equal weight. Mercer and Whitaker Shipping and Trade. She stopped on the step a moment, looking up at the new sign. Then she pushed the door open and went into her work. Mrs. Clara Bellamy was prompt. She arrived at 5:03 the following afternoon in a pale lilac walking dress that had cost more than most Boston widows earned in a year, and she presented herself at the front desk of Mercer and Whitaker with a smile she had been polishing on the carriage ride over. The clerk took her name. The clerk did not return the smile. The clerk said, Miss Whitaker is expecting you, ma'am. This way. Clara Bellamy was led not to a parlor, but to a working office with ledgers open on a side table and a draftsman's plan of a vessel pinned to the wall behind the desk. There was no tea tray. There was no offered chair drawn up close. There was one straight-back chair set squarely in front of the desk. At the distance, one would set a chair for a tradesman come to render an invoice. Abigail rose as she entered. She did not extend her hand. Mrs. Bellamy. Mrs. Hale. Miss Whitaker, if you please. Sit. Clara Bellamy sat. The smile she had been polishing slipped 1 degree. She recovered it. She had survived 2 husbands. She did not lose smiles easily. I confess, my dear, I had hoped for something a little less formal. We are, after all, very nearly old friends. We are not Mrs. Bellamy. We are very nearly nothing at all. You have 10 minutes. State your business. The smile slipped a 2nd degree. Very well. I shall be plain. There has been talk in Charleston, my dear, that has reached even to. There has been talk in Charleston that you placed in Charleston Mrs. Bellamy. Through your cousin Eliza Pinckney on the 3rd of August, through Mrs. Manigault on the 5th, and through your milliner most carelessly, I might add, on the 7th. The substance of the talk is that I am keeping company in a manner not respectable with my partner, Mr. Mercer. The talk is false. You know it is false. You placed it knowing it was false in the hope that the falseness properly aged in the right drawing rooms would in time produce the same effect upon my reputation that the truth would have produced had there been any truth in it to begin with. Clara Bellamy went very still. My dear, I do not... Mrs. Bellamy, I will save us both a quarter of an hour. I have signed statements taken in confidence by a Charleston attorney named Mr. Ravenel, from your cousin, your friend, and your milliner. The statements record the date, the hour, and the substance of each conversation in which the rumor was first uttered. The statements were taken last Friday. I have them in this drawer. You may inspect them if you wish. They will not, however, leave this office today, regardless of what you do. The smile was entirely gone now. How? Clara Bellamy said. Did you? I asked Mrs. Bellamy. I have learned in the last 11 months that asking a careful question of a careful person with a careful payment attached will produce in 3 weeks what a man with an army could not produce in 3 years. It is the simplest trade I know. I have come to be quite good at it. You cannot ruin me with those statements. I have no intention of ruining you, Mrs. Bellamy. I have an intention of ending you. Those are different things. Ruin is loud, ending is quiet. What do you mean? I mean that you will leave Boston tomorrow morning. You will not return. You will write by your own hand a short letter to your cousin in Charleston, retracting the substance of what you said to her on the 3rd of August, attributing the retraction to better information lately received. You will write it before you leave this office. I have paper in this drawer for that purpose, and you will for the remainder of your days give the name Whitaker and the name Hale, while I am at it the same wide berth that a careful sailor gives a coast he has already once been wrecked upon. If you do these 3 things, the statements in this drawer will remain in this drawer. If you do not, Mrs. Bellamy, I would not insult you by describing what would happen. You have lived long enough in the world we both inhabit to imagine it for yourself. Clara Bellamy sat in the straight-back chair in the working office of Mercer and Whitaker for what felt to her like a long time, but was by Abigail's small clock on the wall 92 seconds. Then she said in a voice that was almost steady, May I have the paper? Of course, Mrs. Bellamy. She wrote the letter. She wrote it in 8 minutes. Abigail read it. Abigail handed it back, made one small correction, handed it back again. Clara recopied the corrected line. Abigail sealed it herself, addressed it in her own hand, and gave it to her clerk for the next southbound packet. Clara rose. Miss Whitaker. Mrs. Bellamy. He never spoke of you. I know. In 2 years, not once. Not the way a man speaks of a wife. Not the way a man speaks of any wife. I assumed. You assumed there was nothing there to speak of. So did he. We were both wrong. Clara Bellamy nodded once, very small, and left the office and was on the southbound stage before noon the following day. And she kept her word, every part of it, for the rest of her life. Abigail sat for a long moment after the door closed. Then she drew a clean sheet of paper toward her, dipped her pen, and wrote in her own steady hand the first line of a letter she had been composing in her head since the previous evening. Mr. Hale, she wrote. She paused. She crossed it out. She began again. Nathaniel. That was better. Nathaniel, she wrote. I have read your letter. I have read it 3 times. I do not believe I shall read it a 4th because 3 is enough for any honest letter, and that one is honest. I will not return the deed to Hale House. You have given it freely. I will not insult the giving by handing it back. I will, however, hold it in trust for the present as a thing that belongs to neither of us and to both of us, and may in time belong to whatever we become. I do not yet know what we may become, Nathaniel. I will tell you plainly that I do not intend to be your wife in the old sense ever again. The wife who waited at the window is buried, and I will not dig her up for any man, including the man who once neglected her. If we are to have anything, you and I, it will be something neither of us has yet seen drawn in any settlement on any table. I will be in Philadelphia for the 2nd week of September. My uncle's house is open to you by his own offer on the afternoon of the 15th. If you wish to come, you may come. You will sit in his parlor, and I will sit in his parlor, and we will speak as two people who have not seen one another in a year, because we have not. You will not bring flowers. You will not bring jewelry. You will not bring a ring. You will bring yourself plainly, and I will bring myself plainly, and we will see what is there. I make no promise of any outcome. I make only the promise of an afternoon. It is more than you gave me in 5 years. I trust you will understand why I cannot in honesty offer more than that today. Abigail Whittaker. She read it. She did not change a word. She sealed it. She gave it to her clerk. It reached Hale House on the 28th of August. Nathaniel Hale read it standing in the front hall of his own house in his shirt sleeves with a piece of straw still in his hair from the morning's work in the upper barn. He read it once. He read it a second time. He folded it very carefully into thirds. He walked to the steward's office. He laid it on the desk beside the brass key on the blue ribbon. Then he sat down in the chair, and he put his face in his hands, and for the first time in 22 years, since he was 7 years old and his mother died, Nathaniel Hale of Hale House, Virginia, wept. He wept for nearly a quarter of an hour. When he was done, he washed his face at the basin in the corner. He went back into the front hall. He told Mrs. Latimer he would be away the second week of September. He instructed the foreman to bring in the second cutting of hay without him. He had his second-best dark coat brushed and pressed. He did not write back. He did not have anything to write that the meeting itself would not say better. He arrived in Philadelphia on the 14th. He took a room at a small inn near Independence Hall, a room with one window and one chair, and he sat in the chair from sundown to past midnight without lighting a candle, rehearsing nothing, because he had decided on the road that there would be no rehearsal. On the 15th, at 3 of the afternoon, he rang the bell at Mr. Caleb Whittaker's door on Chestnut Street. Mrs. Margaret Whittaker received him with the cool civility of a woman who had not entirely decided whether to forgive him, and had decided that she would not need to decide today. She showed him into the parlor. Abigail was already there. She was standing by the window in a plain gown the color of slate, with her hands folded in front of her. She turned when he came in. She did not smile. She did not frown. She inclined her head once, the same small civil motion she had made the day she stepped down from the platform at the Old South Meeting House. "Nathaniel." "Abigail." "Sit, please." He sat. She sat. Not close. Across. Mrs. Margaret Whittaker withdrew, leaving the parlor door open by exactly 4 inches in the proper manner. There was a long silence. He had thought in the inn the night before that he would not know how to begin. He had been right. He did not know how to begin. So he simply began. "I burned the petition the day after you left." "I know. Mr. Henderson told my uncle in November." "You knew then, all this time." "I knew that part. I did not know the rest of it until your letter." "Abigail the Shaw, Nathaniel." "Yes. I do not need an account of the year. I lived a year too. I know what a year is. Tell me instead the one thing in your letter you did not write." "I do not know what you mean." "You do." He looked at his hands. I was raised, Abigail, by men who told me every day of my boyhood that a Hale does not feel anything that he cannot use. My uncle Tobias told me once at 14 that I should never marry a woman I loved. He said love made a man stupid in negotiation. He said a Hale married for property and lay with whomever he pleased, and that was the bargain, and that was the trade. He paused. I believed him. I believed him until I was 28 years old and stood in your chamber doorway in a wet coat with a portfolio in my hand and watched you fasten a leather strap around a trunk. I have not believed him since. I will not believe him again. He was wrong. He was wrong about everything." "Yes," Abigail said quietly. "He was." "Abigail." "Wait." He waited. She looked at him a long moment. And in that long moment, Nathaniel Hale saw perhaps for the first time in his life the actual face of his actual wife, not the wife of the parlor portrait, not the wife of the wedding day, not the wife of his idea of a wife, but the actual woman, 31 years old, who had built a shipping firm and ended a rumor in a Boston counting house, and stood across a Philadelphia parlor from him now, and was deciding in real time whether he was worth the trouble of any further word. She decided. "I have a condition, Nathaniel." "Name it." "I will not move to Virginia. Not in the spring, not in the autumn, not in any year. My work is in Boston. My work is in Philadelphia. My work is in the cities of the North, and it will remain there, and it will grow there, and it will not be. It will not be made small ever again to fit the shape of a Virginia drawing room. I would not ask it. You would have asked it 2 years ago. I would have. I will not. I am not finished. Second condition. The deed to Hale House remains in my name. If you and I come to anything in any year, I will not return that deed. I will hold it. I will manage it. I will in time perhaps deed half of it to a charitable trust for the relief of widows in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I have not decided. The decision will be mine. Yes. Third, I will keep the name Whitaker in every counting house, on every ledger, on every contract for the rest of my life. I will not be Mrs. Hale in business. I will not be Mrs. Hale at the Reverend Channing's table. I will not be Mrs. Hale at the lectern of the Old South Meeting House. If you cannot bear that, Nathaniel, if you cannot bear that the name on the door is Whitaker and not Hale, then you must tell me now, and we will not waste another afternoon." He looked at her. "Abigail." "Yes." "I rode 3 days from Virginia in the second best dark coat I own to sit in a parlor with a woman who built half a shipping firm in a year. I do not give a damn what name she puts on the door. I would carry her parcels under that name from one end of State Street to the other if she asked it." She did not smile, but the corner of her mouth for a quarter of a second did something small. Fourth condition. Yes. You will not ever ask me to be the wife at the window again. Abigail, never. You will not ever expect me to greet you at the door of any house we ever share with my hands folded and my eyes lowered. Never. You will not ever promise me a thing in private and forget it in public. Never. I swear it. Do not swear. Abigail. Do not swear, Nathaniel. Sworn promises are how men lie to themselves. Just do the thing, every day, until you are dead or until I am. That is the only proof I will ever take. Yes. He drew a long breath. Then there is a fifth, Abigail. From me. Name it. You will tell me the first time I fail, not the second, not the third, the first. You will not wait at any window for any season ever again. You will tell me plainly the first hour of the first day, and I will hear it, and I will set it right, or I will go. I will not be the man who made you wait again, Abigail. I would rather be the man who is told to leave. That is fair? Is it accepted? It is accepted. Then we will see, Nathaniel. That is what we will do. We will see. Not tonight. Not next month. We will see across a year and another year and another. And at the end of those years, if there is a marriage in any meaningful sense of the word standing between us, we will know it, because we will both be standing in it without having been pushed. Anything less is not worth the doing. Yes. Now. Yes. You will go back to your inn. You will not stay to supper. You will write me 1 letter a month from Virginia, no more, no fewer, and I will write you 1 in return. You will come to Philadelphia for 1 week each spring, and I will come to Boston for 1 week each autumn, and beyond that, we will arrange by post what suits the work and what suits the life. After 2 years, if we are still writing, we will speak again about what comes next, not before. 2 years. 2 years, Nathaniel. I gave you 5 of mine for nothing. You can give me 2 of yours for something. He closed his eyes a moment. Yes. Go then. He rose. He did not approach her. He did not extend a hand. He bowed plainly the way Elias Mercer had once bowed to her in a counting house on State Street, and he walked to the parlor door, and he turned at the threshold. Abigail. Yes? Thank you. For what? For the afternoon. She inclined her head once. He left. He kept his word. He wrote 1 letter a month, no more, no fewer. So did she. He came to Philadelphia in the spring. She came to Boston in the autumn. The first year passed. The second year passed. In the spring of 1820, in Mr. Caleb Whitaker's parlor on Chestnut Street, in the same room, in 2 of the same chairs, Abigail Whitaker laid a folded paper on the small table between them and slid it toward Nathaniel Hale. And the paper was a new contract, not of marriage, but of partnership, drawn in the careful hand of Caleb Whitaker himself, governing the joint management of a single property in the Commonwealth of Virginia, to be administered by the parties as equal principals, with the income directed by mutual agreement to the support of a school for the daughters of widows of the late war. She did not speak. He read it. He took her pen from her hand. He signed. She signed beneath him. That was the marriage they kept. They divided the years between Boston and Virginia. She continued at Mercer and Whitaker until the day she died at the age of 68 of a quiet illness at the boarding house on Beacon Street that she had kept all her working life as a kind of private rebuke to any house that had ever asked her to be smaller than she was. He continued at Hale House planting it, paying it, walking the fields each morning, standing for the legislature once and serving 1 term and refusing a second, because as he wrote to her in the only letter of his she ever framed, the only office he had ever cared to keep was the office of being, at long last, the husband she had agreed in writing to consider. In the autumn of 1834, on a clear, cold afternoon, in the same Old South meeting house, where he had once sat in a back row, in a plain dark coat, and wept into his cravat, Nathaniel Hale watched Abigail Whitaker, 52 years old, deliver the closing remarks at a meeting of the Massachusetts Society for the Education of Indigent Girls. And he did not weep this time, because the weeping had been done 18 years before, and the building had been long since done, and the woman at the lectern was no longer the woman he had not seen. She was the woman he had at last learned to see. He thought, listening to her, of the night he had come home to Hale House in a thunderstorm, with a portfolio under his arm and a plan to send his wife to a small farm in the Shenandoah Valley. He thought of how she had not cried. He thought of how that silence, that one silence, in that one chamber on that one night, had been the truest thing she had ever said to him. And he understood finally, with the clarity of a man who had spent 18 years earning the understanding, that her silence that night had not ended their marriage. It had ended his lie about it. The marriage itself, the real one, the one she had built, had begun the morning she walked through the door of Mercer and Company in a slate-colored cloak. He had only been allowed by her grace and by his own slow learning to walk into it after her. A woman is not saved by marriage, by money, or by the name a man gives her. She is saved by her own hand, by her own work, by the quiet refusal to weep on command. Love without respect is not love. It is only a long room with a window in it and a woman waiting at that window for a carriage that does not come. Abigail Whitaker walked away from that window on a stormy night in 1816, and she did not look back, and she did not beg, and she did not break. And that walk, plain and quiet and unhurried, was the first true step of every life she lived after. That is the whole of the story. That is the whole of what a woman's silence used rightly can do.